Before I get on to this month's new moon reading, I just wanted to let you know that I have lowered my one-to-one recorded reading prices just so that things are slightly more accessible for those of you who have felt like you've wanted a one-to-one reading but haven't felt that you've been able to afford it. So for those of you out there who are curious about having a reading with me, which is one that I record based on a specific question that you have or a specific intention, then head on over to my tarot readings page and see what's on offer there and see if there is something that is going to suit you slightly more than it has done before. Thank you. Hello and welcome to the July new moon reading for the new moon that fell in the UK at 6:55 p.m. on Thursday the 28th of July. Before I draw the cards, I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that there is a lot of uncertainty and a lot of change in the world right now. I know that this is happening on a macro level, but no doubt for many of us it's also happening on a personal level. And one of the things that I always like to go back to when it comes to this kind of change, particularly change over which we feel that we have little or no control, is to then look to the change that we do have control over. And that is to go back to the individual. It's to go back, in Jung's words, to the self, to be able to connect inwardly, to do our own inner work, to contemplate what is going on inside. It may not feel like it's connected. It may seem that it's pretty useless in the face of things that are larger, particularly now in terms of disruption around the world and the economy, for example. But there is that idea of synchronicity which underpinned so much of Jung's work. And that is that acausal connecting principle. In other words, two things that seem to be unconnected find some kind of meaningful union when you view them yourself. And I often think that the kind of work that we do when we look inside and when we are able to work with and deal with our own undealt with material has an impact. It has an impact definitely on our relationship with ourselves and with others, but that seems to ripple out as well into the community, into the world at large. And sometimes we, or most of the time I think, will have very little idea just how much of an impact we can make when we are attending to our own personal business. So it's something that I wanted to say before I went on with the reading, because I think that at times like this, we can feel somewhat disempowered. And if you're not feeling disempowered, that is fantastic. You just keep going. But for those of you who do, remember where you are empowered. And even if you feel like you don't know where to start when it comes to empowering yourself, then one small step at a time. And perhaps the first step is simply asking somebody for help. And if you've got that, then maybe simply seeing or asking for what it is that you need to do or what needs to be attended to next, and trust that the answer will come in time. And if the answer doesn't come, then I think it's about patience. Not everything happens when we want it to. Patience is one of the most underrated virtues I'm learning as I get older. And sometimes it is doing less rather than doing more that makes all the difference. So I just wanted to put that out there before I got onto the reading, which we will come to now. For those of you who want to skip straight ahead to the first card, then click on the timestamp for card 1. For those of you who are still here, I'm just going to go through a very brief introduction as to how I read and the positions for each of the 3 cards. I read turning over the cards one by one. I don't do them all at once. And as I turn them over, then it starts to weave a narrative. And then hopefully by the end of the reading, there will be a pretty clear picture of what it is that is going on for the next 4 weeks and the time beyond that. Card number 1 deals with something that has already happened or is in the process of happening. So there is very little that we can do to affect it because it's obviously in the past. This may be the recent past, or it may be the distant past, or it may be a theme that's run throughout your life. But in some way, the foundation card as it's described, paves the way for the main card in the reading, which is the theme card for this month, which is card number 2. So this is in some way going to have an effect on your life. It may be a small effect, it may be a large effect, but it will be a significant effect. It may affect those around you rather than you directly, but of course that will also have an impact on you. And in some way as well, it will lead into the future. So the impact it creates an impression that is then permanently embedded in your life. And that doesn't mean to say that you are then kind of, you have something to shoulder and to bear for the rest of your life. It's not that. But of course, we are the sum total of every experience that we have had. And we don't forget any of those experiences, even if our conscious mind may do that. So whether this resides in the conscious or the unconscious, this particular theme for this month will continue to ripple out through the rest of your life. And then the final card, card number 3, is the agency card or the tool card. And this is the card where we are able to wrest back some mindfulness or a sense of insight that we can meaningfully apply to the theme card and the foundation card. It is where you are able to connect with the reading on a more meaningful level, where it's not just happening to you, but at least happening through you at the very least. So in other words, there is that place where the rubber hits the road, and that's the agency card. So the agency card is actually really important in terms of how it is that you experience the theme card, but also in how it is integrated moving forward. Those are the 3 cards, and I am going to turn the first card over and start talking about that. And as I said, we will build up a narrative as the reading goes along. So the first card, which is the foundation card, is the Wheel of Fortune. Now, the Wheel of Fortune is one that has appeared relatively recently in a reading, and that was the reading on May the 2nd of this year. And the Wheel of Fortune there was the tool agency card. So in some way, I would say that this is connected. This is the recent past. It could be then that the tool agency card is one that you've used that is then paving the way as this foundation card into what it is that you experience in the rest of the reading for this month. So what I would suggest that you do is, if you're not already familiar with the reading, is to go back to that reading on May the 2nd, and I will link to it in the program notes, and have a listen and see if there is anything there that stands out in terms of something that you are re-experiencing now, or experiencing in a different way, or in some way having a changed perspective of it. Or that you notice that the Wheel of Fortune has now started to turn and there is a new element in your life, or there is a new experience in your life, because of course the Wheel of Fortune is this idea of karma. And when I talk about karma, it is certainly not the kind of karma that if you do something good, then good things will come your way, or if you do something bad, then bad things will come your way. It's sort of like a new age curse that we tend to put on people, don't we? It's and that's not it at all. Karma is simply the great balancing out of life, that there is cause and effect, and that it's less to do with any kind of moral thing, but rather than it's simply just a rebalancing of something. So, for example, when we particularly swing one way in our psyche, whether we swing from one mood to another, one belief system to another, if we go extremes in one way, then we tend to head to the extreme in the other way. And Jung had a term for this switch over, this almost this complete about face in our behavior, in our outlook, and that was what was called enantiodromia. So enantiodromia is the way it is the term to describe the almost flipping of a particular character trait or a particular way of being, and that tends to happen because when we favor one thing over another, when we attend to one particular aspect of our lives, or when we express a particular aspect of our lives without the ability to express its opposite, the opposite will come out, and it will come out probably sideways and relatively rapidly. And sometimes, as I said, with sideways, in surprising ways. So there is this it looks like a rapid flip, but actually it is simply the need for all of this pent-up energy in some way to release itself, so that there is some kind of compensation that happens between in a very one-sided situation. So the Wheel of Fortune for me is the correcting, or it is an attempt to correct, a course correction really, but it is something that visits us apparently from the outside in. Once the wheel has started turning, there is very little, if any, control that we have over it. In fact, I'd say that there is no control. It is that idea of fate, in inverted commas. We have been co-creators in that fate, but once that fate appears, then there is nothing that we can do. We can't put the genie back into the bottle. What we can do is, rather than trying to stop the wheel from turning, or shouting against a hurricane, or pretending it's not happening, developing an ostrich mentality, burying our heads in the sand, or going into some form of hysterical response to it, what we can do is draw into the center of the wheel. And by doing that, we then go to the stillest, quietest part of that wheel when it is moving. And we do that by, as I was saying at the beginning of this reading, going to our own center, not getting hijacked or waylaid, or in some way having our attention too focused on what it is that's going on outside. I'm not saying don't focus on it, because that's denial, but rather not to identify with it completely. And when we don't identify with something completely, then we are in some way in our own center. There is a part of us that is not fully immersed in the events of what's happening, but rather is keeping our own counsel. And we can do this in any way that we find that is useful for us to do that. Some people find that meditation is fantastic. Some people don't. I personally find that therapy is a very good practice in terms of my own way of finding center again. Going out for a walk, being in nature, doing something grounding. But it could be anything. It could be going to a rave. It could be going traveling. It could be just simply sitting in your garden. Anything where you find that you are connected back into yourself. Because, of course, the Wheel of Fortune has already happened, or it is in the process of finishing happening. You're still feeling it turning, but it's already been doing that for a while. So if you have in some way felt off-center recently, then this is the reason. Now, this may be happening personally. It may be happening transpersonally. In other words, it may be happening on a much larger level. Probably both. There is a lot of change going on right now. A lot of it, as I was saying in the introduction, can feel entirely out of our control. But, as I was also saying in the introduction, what we can control is our response to it. And this Wheel of Fortune is really underlining that. The response to move into the center. And also, I think, and this comes by itself, it's not something that we can force on our circumstances, is an acceptance of what's going on. There is the gentle, peaceful acceptance that I think that we eventually reach sometime down the line when we've worked through a lot. Then there is the simple acceptance of the fact that we are not going to close our eyes to what's happening. And I think that that's something that's more accessible for most of us. It's not about this guru-like sitting there cross-legged, being able to take everything as it comes, whether it's good, bad, ugly, whatever. But it is simply to acknowledge and to really live with the idea that what is going on is what's going on. And the Wheel of Fortune doesn't necessarily describe anything bad. It is change. And sometimes when we put a value on that change, in other words, this is terrible, we can very often cheat ourselves out of an incredibly enriching experience. Or we can cheat ourselves out of being able to be in the moment with something and being able to experience something in the full humanness of who we are, with all of the conflicting emotions, all of the conflicting thoughts. There is nothing wrong with conflicting emotions and conflicting thoughts. I think the idea sometimes of that chasing after inner peace really is to deny what it's like to be human, which is forever changing, forever being at the whims of external and internal impulses and being able to ride the waves of that, even when sometimes we don't quite know what's going on. It's to embrace ourselves as changeable, variable human beings, that we can sometimes experience 4 seasons in one day, whether that is something to do with what it is that's going on inside us or what it is that's going on in the people around us. But the Wheel of Fortune is really that still center of moving in when this change happens and being able to look at this and go, well, this is what's going on right now. How can I maintain balance? How can I not lose my footing in this? Not only so that I don't have to deal with the incredible discomfort of losing that balance, but of also being able to make the most of what's going on. Make the most of whatever it is that's going on, and to bear witness to it in a way where we are as present as possible to it. For example, if there is change and it is something, it's not inherently good or bad, it's just destabilizing. Sometimes all we want to do is just pretend that nothing is happening, even though what's happening might actually end up being something that we eventually embrace. But if we deny it, then what we do is that we aren't able in some way to work with it meaningfully and also to witness it. To witness the unfolding of something. If we're ostriches in the sand, it might feel like a safe place to be, but our butts are sticking in the air when our heads are in the sand. We are still very exposed. There are things that are going to be happening whether we like it or not. But if we take our head out of the sand and we look around, we might be surprised at what it is that we see. We might also be surprised at what it is that we are capable of. Generally, for me, the Wheel of Fortune heralds something that is ultimately enriching or expansive in one's life. The Wheel of Fortune is also equated with Jupiter, and Jupiter is about expansion. And again, it can feel uneasy. There is a part of our psyche, for most of us, that doesn't like change at all, even when that change works in our favor. That part of the psyche wants to take cover. And I think that there is a fine line to tread between taking cover, as in moving into the center of the wheel, rather than sticking our heads under the covers. And by taking cover, that we can then look around, as I was saying, see what's going on, and that is far more beneficial than not knowing what's going on and destabilizing. And then, unfortunately, what happens when we destabilize is that we cling on to the nearest available thing, person, event, fad, whatever it is, to help us feel safe. And when we do that, we know that we're on the external part of the wheel. We are clinging on for dear life. When we are able to be inside, we hold to our own, which doesn't mean that we need to be separate or isolated. That's not it. But rather, we have our own footing that we are then able to move from. If that thing that we cling to changes or disappears, then again, we are lost. We are up shit creek without a paddle. So what we need to do is take the paddle and deal with it ourselves. We start rowing. We are then in a position as well to be a stable presence for others in our lives, and that creates more stability. And as soon as there are people who are gathered round who are all in a state of stability in terms of being interdependent, then there are ways of being able to deal with things that are far more effective, particularly when it is done in a community or as a group or as a family or even in partnership. But deal with your own stability first. I'm going to read what's on the card, and then maybe something will be thrown up in terms of what it is that has happened that feels familiar in your own life. And that is fortune, luck, creativity, self-realization, big breakthrough, Now, my experience of big breakthroughs is that sometimes, and I can only speak for myself, but I don't think I'm alone in this, that big breakthroughs they can be destabilizing in as much as it creates a sense of inflation. So in other words, we tend to, or there is a part of us that tends to want to attach a particular interpretation to a breakthrough, whether that is that you interpret it in terms of something specific that you want to have happen, when the truth is that there is something else going on at play, or that there is an interpretation that one has finally done one's work. And of course, that never really happens. It is always about layer after layer after layer that is being removed. And the thing with Jupiter, which is important, is that idea of overinflation is one that is always present as a particular risk. And I mean, apart from being rather unbearable to be around when we're in a state of inflation, one of the other things is that we do lose out on the reality of our experience, and also the reality of the gift that can come with something that really feels comparatively humble in terms of what it is that has come into our lives. I remember many years ago, if it wasn't cloud nine ecstasy that I was achieving, then in some way I was doing something wrong. And that kind of inflation really prevented me from dealing with aspects of myself that were standing in the way of real progress. And the real progress was really an appreciation for the smaller changes in life, which were actually really profound, much more profound than the ones where I slapped an interpretation on the fact that in some way I was ascending as some kind of elevated human being. God help anyone who was around me at the time. And we start to understand, I think, when we work with the Wheel of Fortune and we've been flung off a few times, or we cling to those around us, or whatever is available to help us feel safe. When we've dealt with that several times, and then we learn to go back into center, and we learn to look around curiously without attaching interpretations to what we think ought to be there or what we want to be there, then very often the Wheel of Fortune will bring us things that are surprising and expansive, but not necessarily ones that we would see immediately because we're looking for something else. And I'm just putting that out there because I think that sometimes when we look at the Wheel of Fortune in the near past as the foundation, some of us will go, surely I should have felt something big. Surely I should have felt the earth moving under my feet. Surely something should have presented itself, sort of Ace of Wands or Ace of Cups style, coming out with this disembodied hand like the Rider-Waite, and in some way announcing itself as rather special. And that's not necessarily the case. What I would suggest is looking for what is new, or looking for what no longer is there that maybe you were ready to leave behind. Because the Wheel of Fortune is also about shifting. When you shift towards something, you can shift away from something as well. And so the expansion may not necessarily be a massive announcement of something grand, but rather an expansion into your own life, so that you are taking up more space as you in your own life, that the self, that core part of us that is entirely us and yet also linked in to everything else, it's a bit of a dichotomy there, that the self is more available, that we are more connected to that, and that can be expansive beyond anything that feels like it's shiny or special when we haven't yet really appreciated what it's like to live more on our own terms, to be able to experience more of who we are, to connect in with an authenticity of who we are, and know that we don't have to be special to feel a deep connectedness with ourselves, with others, and with life. And that connectedness comes and goes, by the way. It comes and goes. It's not there forever. And that's the other fleeting nature of how we are as people. And I think that the Wheel of Fortune is one that can also usher us towards that idea of being able to connect in with everything. The Wheel of Fortune is number 10 out of 22 cards. We're reaching that midpoint. We're reaching that reckoning with ourselves. We're reaching the ability to be able to deal with things that are neither, that aren't totally right or aren't totally wrong, aren't totally black, aren't totally white. We can deal with that paradox. We can understand that we are flawed and yet lovable. So the Wheel of Fortune, change, expansion, the bringing in of something new, but it is through events over which we have no direct control, even though at some point we were responsible for setting them in motion. And by being responsible, I mean, in other words, we were instrumental in it. This is not about beating yourself up and saying, well, why didn't I make the most of it when I knew, or shouldn't I have known at the time? That's not it. Rather, as I said, we are co-creators, co-conspirators in our own lives, and very much often on an unconscious level. So the Wheel of Fortune is the result, the change as part of a larger process of becoming, of a particular journey in one's life. And that is what is leading us into the current weather, which is card number 11, which is justice. So we've got the Wheel of Fortune as a 10 major arcana. We have justice as the 11 major arcana. And this is that idea then of karma, as we were talking about. So the Wheel of Fortune is that shift, but then justice is the making a choice one way or another. There is a path that needs to be taken, and there is also the path that is not taken. And this is a major arcana card, and so therefore there is going to be an element of not being in full control of what it is that's going on, because in some way the judgment or the justice here, don't get that mixed up with the judgment card, but the judgment passed down in the justice card is going to be one that is on a much more pervasive level than simply you making a decision about something. If you're in the position of making a decision about something, it is because there are circumstances around you that are kind of pushing you or encouraging you to make a decision. And you aren't in control of those circumstances necessarily. But what you do have is this ability to discern between path taken and path not taken. And very often it's the path that is not taken that is the one that really demands more attention, even though perhaps it's tempting not to look at it in favor of the thing that is moving you forward. But I think that in terms of justice, this is about dealing with unfinished business, or rather acknowledging what it is leaving, or acknowledging what it is that you are leaving behind, or what you have started to leave behind. It's what is no longer there, so that you can then shift forward into something else. Now, this might be incredibly practical. This might be something that is very much in your mundane, everyday, tangible life. It may be as simple as a decision around a house, for example, or it may be a decision around the direction that you're going to take in your business. It may be mundane, but it's also going to be significant because it's going to have an impact on how it is that you experience your life moving forward. But justice can also be, particularly when you're dealing with major arcana cards, a more internal process, something that is larger and in terms of being a little bit more nebulous, a little less tangible, something about who it is that you are, who it is that you're choosing to be, and what it is that you are leaving behind as a result of that choice. And that choice may be, you feel that you're making a choice about something, but there may be something else underneath that is connected to that isn't quite as apparent. And one of those examples might be that you, for example, have decided that you no longer want to tolerate a particular area of your life that you've tolerated for a long time, and so you make a decision to do something different. But that conscious decision has actually been based on maybe an unconscious process that has been going on for quite some time. So this is the bit above the surface that you finally see breaking through, that you can discern out of all of this this other stuff that's going on under the surface. It breaks through. There is this moment of clarity, but there's been a whole lot of other stuff going on underneath the surface to get you to this point. So after the Wheel of Fortune, then there is Justice, which is, in this card, I think that the word is perfect, adjustment. If you look at the writing on the card, there is that idea of adjustment that's there, and balance. That's another one. And just seeing if there's any other writing. There's fertility as well that's there, which may jump out to a few of you. And to find one's own light, and a wise leader. And these all speak to this idea of discernment, of choosing something over another thing. And I look at the lightsaber that is resting under the arm of what looks like, a kind of Star Wars Jedi warrior. And that idea of blindfolding, I'm thinking of Luke Skywalker then in Star Wars Episode 4, who is learning to be a warrior, and he puts on a blindfold to try and do some fighting with the lightsaber. And that idea of connecting in with the Force, which is really the knowing that comes with the connection with oneself, with one's intuition. Using the Force is really using the force of one's own inner discernment, one's own inner sage. And the more that we practice using it, the better we are able to connect with it. It is about practice, and a lot of the practice is about learning to trust oneself and one's own judgment. When I look at the card again, the tiniest writing at the bottom says, harvest, time of rest in one's own center. And the Wheel of Fortune works perfectly with this, because Justice is the figure that comes out of the center of the Wheel of Fortune. And at the moment, what is going to be happening, the theme for this month, in some way, something will be brought to fruition. Whether it is the end of something and the beginning of something, the realization of something maybe on a physical level, but also the realization of something perhaps on a more personal, psychological, emotional level, of understanding what it is that you are for and what it is that you are not for, what is going to serve you and what is not going to serve you. And that is all because there is, for some reason, whatever it is that you've been through, a much more clear connection in to what is true for you. The other thing that's worth bearing in mind, and it speaks back to this idea of the path that's not taken, or making a decision and cutting something away, is that while the figure of Justice, this transpersonal, this archetypal figure of Justice, is blindfolded and holding those scales, there is that sword, and there is that idea of balance that needs to happen, which has also been aided by the Wheel of Fortune. It is seeking to come back to a place of equilibrium, but then that idea of really being quite scrupulous in what it is that needs to leave. And that lightsaber, I love the idea of the lightsaber because it is to do with light. And when I think of light, it's not necessarily to do with good versus evil, but rather light as in discernment, consciousness, awareness. So the opportunity this month is to really be very aware of something that you are choosing, but also something that you are not choosing. And it's not that you're not choosing it simply because it sort of falls away as a default. In other words, it's just something that is a byproduct, something that is a waste product of your choice. But actually it is something that you actively do not choose. And I think that that's going to be incredibly important. It feels in my own mind and my own connection to my intuition that there has to be due process done in what it is that you are actively not choosing. Because I think that when we are clear about what it is that we are not choosing, we get much more clear about why it is that we are not choosing it and why it is that we are choosing something else. And when we are more connected into the why of something, then we tend not to make the same unconscious choices again and again and again. When we are able to reach a point of clarity about a particular thing that perhaps hasn't served us as well as it could have done, or hasn't served us at all, or served us well and then no longer serves us, then we are able to leave it behind, and it doesn't drag behind us in our shadow where we can't see it, but rather we are very aware and we turn around and we look at it as we move away from it. And then we turn around again and look forwards to what it is that we are moving towards. But in order to know what it is that we are moving towards, we need to know what it is that we are moving away from. And with that may come emotion. And that's something that feels incredibly important. One of the things that majors don't really do is that they don't tend to express the humanness of our responses to them. So the majors refer to these massive currents that can then sort of pop up in particularly personal ways and sometimes collective ways as well, and both. But the human feeling of things, the processing of things, the going through the emotions of things, the connecting in to the myriad expressions that we experience day by day, that's our business to attend to as well. They are implied in the majors, but they are not there in the majors. That is where we bring the human face to what is otherwise an incredibly transpersonal experience. So this is not about floating above things and taking everything in your stride necessarily. There may need to be release along with the saying goodbye of things. The release might be part of it. I think very often when we look at something, look forward to something, and we don't look at the path not taken. So if we don't acknowledge actively what it is that we're leaving behind, what we are actually choosing unconsciously is we're choosing not to have to deal with the emotions of that. Much rather look forward than look back and grieve. That's part of what we might say to ourselves, even if we don't admit it. By looking forward, we tend to avoid the very necessary aspect of our humanity. And our humanity is very often heart-driven, and it can feel very messy to that part of us that simply wants to be above it all and have everything sorted and be able to make wise decisions that will never have an emotional impact, that will never test us in that way. When actually to be able to feel, and not necessarily to be able to dictate how it is that we feel, but rather to let that just simply happen, I think is a really integral part of the process. And if I now look at the Justice card and I look, there appears to be this idea of water around the head of the figure in Justice. Now, the top of her head is above water. That's possibly the sort of our own experience of things. But underneath there is this idea of currents. There is this idea of water, which is cups, which is feeling. And so feeling, I think, needs to happen. We need to bring light to our emotions so that we are better able to move on with greater awareness, but not carrying those undealt with feelings as baggage that then doesn't allow us to really leave those aspects of the past behind that really aren't working in our best interests anymore. So I would say that emotional processing is going to be part of this, and also part of the emotional processing perhaps might be, for the first time in a while, for some of you, to allow yourself to feel joy, because joy as well can feel incredibly threatening. And I think it's important to acknowledge that some of the feelings that we want to avoid are not necessarily the ones that most of us would consider negative in inverted commas. Many of us will go out of our way to feel positive emotions at the expense of negative emotions, but some of us, and in fact, I would say most of us some of the time, and some of us quite a lot of the time, will go out of our way not to feel those emotions that are expansive, that are to do with love, to do with joy, to do with anything that connects us in to life itself. And perhaps one of the reasons why we avoid these is so that we don't get disappointed, so that our hearts aren't broken again, so that we can protect ourselves from those feelings when they disappear, or in some way we feel that we don't deserve them, and that we just wait for the other shoe to drop, and we don't allow those feelings in. And when we don't allow those feelings in, then we are trying to live life on our own very limited terms, and then our experience of life is in turn limited. So the justice card, I think, is also about giving justice or doing justice to ourselves as sentient beings, to do justice to ourselves as beings that have the ability to feel a wide range of emotions, and that sometimes what it is that we will do our utmost to avoid are those emotions that are beautiful, even while they may not last. No emotion lasts. It doesn't mean that it abandons us forever or we'll never feel it again. But where is it perhaps that you stop yourself from feeling big feelings? And I'm saying big feelings because I'm thinking about the sort of Jupiterian experience of the Wheel of Fortune, and also because they're two major arcana cards. Where is it that there is a balance that needs to be redressed in your own heart about what it is that makes up who you are? And that path not taken, and the acknowledgement of the path not taken, can then open you up to the path that is taken. And that path that is taken is also going to be replete with its own experiences, its own mundane experiences, practical experiences, but its own emotional experiences as well. So my suggestion is that there is something new around the corner, and it is going to ask for your active participation in reaching towards it, but also with the other hand letting go of something that is just not working for you anymore. When we're able to, as the writing on the Justice card says, to find our own light, then we are able to connect in with something that's uniquely us, and part of that will probably be to connect in with things that feel unfamiliar. And just because it's unfamiliar, it doesn't mean it doesn't belong to you. In fact, it may be that it has belonged to you for a very long time, and it's been calling your name for a very long time. And perhaps it's time now to connect in with that, because the situation has now made it more accessible to you and made the environment more conducive so that you are ready to stand there and look it full in the face. So that's the Wheel of Fortune then, paving the way for the idea of justice this month. And then the tool card, the agency card, where it is that you can connect meaningfully with these two cards, is the Eight of Wands. So the Eight of Wands is that idea of meeting face to face. This may be a physical meeting with somebody else. It may be a meeting with a part of yourself, or the duality of who it is that you are. In other words, a new aspect of who you are then comes alongside the one that you already know, or it could be both. But one of the things I'll say is that the Eight of Wands has always suggested rapidity, swiftness is the word. There is this coming together of something that is that is really quite electric in the way that it happens. That electricity may be that idea, that metaphor for that zinginess, that frisson that you have when you come face to face with somebody. But it also may simply be that idea of the electricity being really rapid moving, and also light something up. So there is that moment of awareness of coming face to face with something that feels both familiar and unfamiliar. And it is going to be connecting in at a highly intuitive level. This is wands, this is energy, this is to do with that idea of one's own inner light, to do with the self and one's own intuitive center. So this is going to be gut feel stuff. There's no time for thinking about things, and I don't think there's going to be any time needed for thinking about things. This is a very, very fast gut intuitive response and awareness time. That's what it is. It's not about sitting down and doing spreadsheets and calculations and thinking things through, pros and cons, no SWOT analyses or anything like that. It's not about emotions primarily, though emotions will come into it. And it will obviously affect your tangible everyday life. As you can tell, I'm going through all the suits here. But primarily, this is about trusting yourself with this. The Wheel of Fortune and Justice have in some ways equipped you to do this, to connect in with yourself. And then the point where the rubber hits the road, the more mundane, everyday human side of things, is this experience that one has that is very rapid, very zingy, and it is going to require moving lightly. And we move lightly when we don't sludge things down with too much analysis. This is not about being stupid. It's not about, throwing out the baby with the bathwater in terms of abandoning one's own good sense. In fact, if you abandon your own good sense, then you are not connected in with your intuition. But it is about trusting that it's what you know in the very bones of you to be the thing that serves you, is the thing that you stand for. I just had a quick look at the card and there is no English on it, so I have grabbed the companion book to the Röhrig deck, which I have in front of me, and this is what it says. An imminent event. Good news is coming sooner than one expects. Truth eliminates misunderstandings. Obstacles are overcome. An imminent event. Good news is coming sooner than one expects. Truth eliminates misunderstandings. Obstacles are overcome. Now I can just imagine many of us out there immediately rushing in our minds to what it is that might be, or what it is that we hope it is. And again, if these two cards, the Wheel of Fortune and Justice, have served their due in this reading, it is about holding lightly to all of this until the time that you know that you know. It is about not focusing so deeply and intently on something that you are blind to what it is that's going on around, but rather to remain open and receptive and light-footed in the face of events that are fast moving. And when you do that, then you are far better able not only to see what's going on around you in a broader way, one that takes it all in, but also you are able to connect more deeply in with that intuition, because you are not forcing your psyche down a particular path, which of course takes us further away from our intuition. So remain light on your feet, remain expectant and open, and then that connection in with your intuition also remains flexible and open. And then you'll find out what it is that the Wheel of Fortune has turned and brought to you, and what you are able to say goodbye to before you are able to say hello to what it is that's standing in front of you. So know that when this happens, that you have all of the skills and the equipment at your fingertips to be able to deal with this in a way that doesn't cut off your own experience of who it is that you are, of life, of your own feelings, your own intuitive desires, and your own intuitive wisdom. And then you are thus able to experience something perhaps in quite a new way. And it may not necessarily come in a way that announces itself with great fanfare. It may be something small, or it may be something that comes up sort of gradually and then taps you on the shoulder and you turn around and you see it. But when you know, you know. And that openness is really what's going to stand you in the best stead, because it is that is going to allow you to step more fully into the experience, because you know what it is that you are stepping away from, and you know why you're stepping away from it, and you know why it no longer serves you anymore. And your intuition will then continue to remind you of what no longer serves, so that if that ever comes back again, it will tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, look, remember that? You made that decision. You don't need to make that decision again. Or if you do, it's not going to last very long. So, as I said, that justice card really needs to work its magic and continue to work its magic in your life, so that you are able to make those Jedi-like decisions and go straight in for what it is that really matters to you. And the Eight of Wands will then present itself to you in a way that really does matter to you. And you will be in a position to know that. If you have any questions or comments, please do email me. You can comment under the recording if there is space for that. Otherwise, my love and wishes to you, and I will speak to you again next month. Goodbye.